Welcome everyone to the next webinar in our series on Reg4ALL, Registries for All Researchers. I am Greg Biggers. I'm entrepreneur in residence here at Genetic Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking today about Reg4ALL for Researchers, how the Registries for All project fuels research participation, and how you as researchers interact with the Reg4ALL community. A little note about our format today. When questions come up for you during our time, please type them into your panel on the GoToWebinar application. We will collect all of your questions, combine them with any duplicates, and provide time before we finish today for answering lots of questions. So go ahead and just whenever they come up, pop those questions in, and we'll start managing a list of things we want to talk about at the end. So, first I'd like to remind you a little bit about the gist of Reg4ALL, the world's first truly participant-centric health and disease registry, and it's powered by some innovative features. It is cross-disease, so it's no longer a bunch of different siloed registries for various disease or health conditions, but it's intermingling everybody together so that we can discover comorbidities as well as deep single disease focus. It includes standardized data elements, such as the common data elements coming out of the NIH. Some engaging game mechanics, where we have availed ourselves of the learning going on in the interaction science world and the social science world. It is guided by scalable methods for including disease-specific data elements in addition to the cross-disease elements, and super accessible sharing controls for each participant, so that it exhibits a participant-centric approach to everything about the registry, such that a member of the Reg4ALL community exercises explicit control over what data they're storing, for what purposes their data may be used, what projects may or may not use their data, and who may or may not contact them for additional studies. It is a fine-grained control over privacy and sharing and consent for various purposes. And so now I'm going to, so that's just a quick little, Reg4ALL in a nutshell, the moral center of the project about being participant-centric. Now I'm going to turn the controls over to Robert Shelton, who will tell us a bit about the researcher perspective and give us a demo of research interaction on the Reg4ALL platform.
Terrific. Thanks, Greg. Can everybody hear me? So, Greg, are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm going to pick up where Greg left off, and I'm going to assume that people on this call have seen something on Reg4ALL, and that the nature of this discussion is really to take the system from the other side, from the researcher side, and take a look at what is powered once someone has registered in Reg4ALL as a participant. So in order to do that, I'm going to give 2 slides that talk about the architecture of the whole system, and then I'm just going to do a very quick demo to show you the system and then open it up to questions. So first off, on the architecture, we really start with a front-end facing that could be the Reg4ALL theme. It could also be, at this point, we have 2 additional themes. One is called trialsfinder.org, and a third is called freethedata.org. These are systems that employ the basic Reg4ALL platform, and but each of those systems is really set up to allow prospective participants to be educated and to register for the system and to make self-reporting of their medical information into what we would call a fully identified protective data storage location. Around that data store location, we wrap a technology called privacy layer, which is used to empower participants to authorize specifically who has access to their information. And this is not just an on-off control, a a share or not share control. It actually is dynamic. It can be changed on the fly as the participant gets more information about who wants their data and for what purpose. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate when we get into the actual demo. So it really has three settings. One is a consent setting. The second is a decline to permit access. And the third is a setting that we will call ask later. It's sort of, I know that I want to make a decision after I get more information, so ask me again when you have more information for me, and I'll then decide whether to consent or decline or to defer the answer further. From this basic architecture, we're able to make that data store searchable. And by that we mean that researchers, disease organizations, research platforms that are looking for certain types of data have, based upon each participant's individual authority, gained access or not through a system called RecruitSource, which is what we're going to look at in the demo, for searching that data index to determine who meets their criteria for whatever the purpose is. For instance, I'm in a demo today searching for someone who meets a certain criteria for a research study or clinical trial. This is what I'm showing on the screen now is actually the architecture of the whole system that exists today. It runs at this moment and is currently in use by both live personnel as well as we have a demo database. That's what I'll be demoing from. Later this fall, our intention is to make it possible to add this last piece, which is based upon the high-tech regulations, to allow participants in the database to request from electronic sources where they know that they have records an export of that information into that same data store. So whereas today the system is all self-reported information, and in the case of Free the Data, it's an upload of the BRCA1 or BRCA2 test results. Later this fall, our intention is to add the ability for patients to upload information directly into the store or to ask parties who are holding their information to do that for them. So with that sort of high-level overview, let's go into how the various systems are integrated. And basically what Genetic Alliance saw was a challenge based upon its contacts with researchers and support groups and people trying to put together various research platforms, that the ability to make contact between a potential participant who might be of interest to those parties and who might gain something for themselves or for other people with their same conditions was very difficult to connect with those platforms and researchers and support groups. It was inefficient. There's lots of red tape. It does not typically come under the treatment, payment, or operations exclusions of HIPAA, and therefore there's missed opportunities and lots of frustration by lots of people. And what Genetic Alliance has sought to do with this whole platform is to change months of time to get contact with people into days or maybe even hours, to reduce the cost and to accelerate how fast research could occur. And so the way that that's being accomplished is through two platforms, Privacy Layer and Reg4ALL, which the participant interacts with, and the platform of RecruitSource, which we'll look at in a moment, which the researchers, support groups, and research platforms interact with. So each of those has authenticated access to their respective platforms. So the way that it works is that there's an indexing service in between these two, which creates a search engine kind of capability for RecruitSource to look at data that's been permitted by the participant. Genetic Alliance staff establishes a campaign. It can either be just a Genetic Alliance campaign or a co-branded co-creation campaign with other parties that either is, as you see down in the lower left-hand corner, the Trials Finder or the Free the Data campaign or others in the future, or it can be just on a hosted website where the widget that we've created for entering data can be posted on another party's website. The campaign materials are transmitted to participants or published on a website in the form of either the widget or just a link to where the Reg4ALL site or the branded site is located. The participant can click on that link, which would then redirect them to first to the privacy layer to set up their privacy permissions, which they do through creating an account, or if they already have one, just using their account to set their various privacy directives. And if you've participated in other webinars, you've seen this demoed through the Reg4ALL interface, and optionally to get ID verification through third-party sources. This is going to be particularly important if the participant is requesting upload of information from EHRs where the ID verification is going to be a required step before they make that request. Then once they've set their privacy permissions, they're able to answer a pertinent questionnaire, and in the case of Free the Data, you would see that they can submit pertinent records such as the BRCA genetic information. All that goes into a health information database, which is then indexed in an indexing service, and that subject index is made available only with the participant's permission. So separately, what's happening up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen is that the researchers would set up alerts for kinds of people that they're interested in finding in RecruitSource, and I'll show you how that's done in a moment. Those researchers either get an alert or they just log in based upon wanting to conduct open-ended searches to RecruitSource. They authenticate themselves, and then they conduct a search for subjects or people that meet certain criteria, and that hits the search index, but before it delivers results, it first determines whether whether that particular researcher has the rights to see the results of their search. And that's done by reaching back to the participant to determine whether they have consented in advance, or if not, then to send them a message through privacy layer to the participant, and they can either decline, or if they forgo declining, they can ultimately consent to the request. And when that is uploaded into their privacy directives, that information goes back. Now that researcher has access, they can view the search results, and then if they wish to make an offer to make contact, they can get in contact directly with the participant if the participant wishes. So I know it's a whole lot of information. It's really a lot simpler in practice than it is in what I just showed you in a PowerPoint. So let me show you how it works in practice. I have two sites opened on our demo database here. One is a Reg4ALL account that I've actually already logged in, and I'm logged in as a person that I'm calling Charles Briggs. And let's make sure I didn't time out here in a second. So I have timed out. The system has an automatic timeout at the end of 5 minutes. So I'm going to re-log in as Charles Briggs. The system has, as you've seen in previous demos, sort of banking level security up front. So I'm now logged in as Charles Briggs, who's a male located in Costa Mesa, California. He has an email address of cancerpatient@outlook.com. He's entered his phone number. There's his challenge questions and his site key that he would recognize to confirm that it's a legitimate site. Now, I've previously gone in and created a health profile for Charles. And so just to take a quick look at this, and again, if you've already seen the Reg4ALL system, then you would have already either used this or seen this demoed. So we're waiting for his health profile to come up. You know, I've never run this on GoToWebinar, so I'm hoping that it runs on GoToWebinar.
Maybe while we're waiting for also to show us the privacy setting.
Sure. Try. Okay, well there we go. So thanks for the suggestion, Greg. This is Charles's privacy settings, and you can see that he has set general, it's a pretty conservative setting. He has the ability for advocacy groups, researchers, and various data analysis platforms to discover his data in a pseudo-anonymized form. He has everything, everyone is set up to ask him before they are able to make contact with him, and then he wants to either deny or be asked before he permits his data to be used, except for the show-related content features. And so he's able to edit those settings. We'll just leave them as they stand at present. Let me now see if I can go back to the health profile. There we go.
And Robert, when a participant says, yes, a researcher or advocacy group or whomever can discover my data, what does that mean? That's different from discover my identity, correct?
Absolutely. So the discovered data means that the discovery is based upon what would be HIPAA de-identified information. So none of the data that's requested is permitted to be anything that discloses his identity. So for instance, the year of diagnosis is part of the data that's discovered, but not the exact date of diagnosis. The year of birth is discoverable, but not the exact date of birth. So the discovery is based upon de-identified information, not personally identifiable information. So I'm now able to open up Charles's answers, and you can see in Reg4ALL, he's answered that he has liver cancer, hepatitis C, and hepatocellular carcinoma. He's listed some medications, some symptoms, and he has a long list of answers in liver cancer and liver disease and other related answers. So let me just flip over now to RecruitSource, and I'm going to log in as a researcher into RecruitSource. And the researcher I'm going to log in as is C Researcher, which stands for Cancer Researcher. Again, same sort of security. So I'm now logged in as Cancer Researcher, and as with Reg4ALL, on RecruitSource side, the researcher has to set up an account, has to be authenticated. At this point, we're doing everyone that logs into the system being live authentication, meaning there would need to be a telephone conversation to yield this information. Any organizations that sponsor or that vouch for that individual would be listed as organizations or affiliations, so that some permissions relate to affiliations as opposed to the specific researcher. So all of that would be entered. And then once authenticated, then the researcher is able to search for recruits or to search for people that are of interest. And they can do it either from a search bar that's sort of like Google, or they can do it from a more complex advanced search. And so just to show you what's available, they can use Boolean searches for the search query. And so if we just search for liver cancer, and let's just put an age bracket on this between 30 years old and, let's say, 75 years old. We can now search for anyone in the database who has liver cancer and is within the age bracket of 30 to 75 years old. And we come up with 12 records that meet that criteria, and it will show us those records and the distance from the researcher's location that those individuals are situated. So what we could do next is to say, well, let me get more precise. Maybe I'm looking for just males, and let's see what I've now got. So this is 30 to 75-year-old males with liver cancer in the database. And that reduces my 12 down to 6. And I'm still seeing people that are 400 or so miles away. So I can now say, let me focus on location, and let's move to in the country of United States and in the state of California. And still just males, still just liver cancer. And I'm now able to search for that constrained information, and I see that I have 2 records in the state of California that are males between 30 and 75 with liver cancer. And so remember, in the PowerPoint I said you could be brought here by an alert. So before I even look at either of these 2 records, let's just say I want to set up a standing request for anyone that meets this criteria. So I can create an alert that says this is my California men, or let's say males, with liver cancer alert. And I want to be alerted on a daily basis if there's anyone that enters Reg4ALL, any of the sites that use the Reg4ALL platform that meet the criteria of being in California, male with liver cancer, and I guess I should say 30 to 75 years old. So I can save that, and now in the future, if anyone enters the database that meets this criteria, cancer researcher will receive an alert for that person saying that there's someone new that's entered the database that meets their criteria, and they then know to come back to the system, authenticate themselves, and be taken straight to the search results that they have rights to. So in this case, I see 2 people, one in Irvine, the other in Costa Mesa. Now, we know who this is. This is our Charles Briggs, but this researcher doesn't. Now, in this case, this icon actually means that express consent is required before a contact can be made. So the other icons are, if there was a checkbox beside it, that would mean that advance permission had already been given, or if there was a stop sign, that means that the potential subject currently prohibits contact. and there would be some information about how to make contact with them. For instance, what organizations to become affiliated with in order to find that person. So in this case, we know that this individual, the 68-year-old male in Costa Mesa, requires making contact and getting advance permission. So first, before I can actually look at this person and look at all that pseudo-anonymized information for them, so I'm actually seeing this subject with a pseudo-identifier, some top-level information, and this is all of the questions that we saw before that Chris Briggs, or the Charles Briggs rather, had answered. His HIV status is negative. All of the questions that he answered in the Reg4ALL database, and at this point he's answered 70 questions. So those 70 questions, all of that information is available to this party on a de-identified basis. And if looking at that, let's say that they had an exclusion criteria based on HIV status, and if this came up being positive, then they know that there's no reason to make contact to Charles Briggs. But in this case, they've looked at it, they've determined that he's fine from that perspective, and presumably they're ready to proceed. So they can now say, I want to make contact. And they are then asked, for what reason do you wish to make contact? And they can either select general research, meaning that it's just their credentials that are going to be the basis of Charles making an assessment, or they can go to a pick list, which we've again entered for them as part of registration for the studies that they are interested in recruiting for. And in this case, let's say they're going to recruit him for a radiation therapy study. So they then have a small end user license agreement that this is the summary of to agree to, which basically says they won't make any use of this data without his permission, that the only reason they're receiving it is for the purposes of recruiting him for the purpose they described, and they now have entered that information. And if we now go back to their contact list in their toolbox, we see that in their toolbox, we have a breakdown. Great. So I'm going to hope that all works its way out, but I'm going to sign in again as Charles Briggs. Terrific. Well, believe it or not, at 8:30 this was all running perfectly. So, C. Briggs. So I'm logged back in as Charles Briggs, and now I see that I've got a notification which would have come to me via whatever means I established I wanted notifications. In this case, it would have been as an email or as a text alert, and that gives me a login link, which I then take and I go straight to my notifications section, which shows me I have a research opportunity for Charles Briggs. It's from a researcher named Cancer Researcher. It was today's date, and it requires my attention. So by clicking on the link for that research opportunity, I can see I have this Cancer Researcher associated with KSNA as the organization at that address. I can read more information about the researcher. I can read more about their research. I can see what the purpose of the research is, which is this radiation therapy study. I can view details of this study, which is actually a link to clinicaltrials.gov, and I can, on the basis of this explanation that my express permission is permitted to give this researcher access to my identity, I can either consent, or I can decline, or I can wait for later to decide. And in this case, let's say I consent. And now the consent is recorded, which means that it falls off my list. I no longer have notifications. And if I go back over to the privacy settings, which we looked at earlier, the privacy setting should now include another setting for cancer researcher to have an express permission right here to allow them to make contact. So this cancer researcher is now listed with an allow contact to be made. And if I come back over to RecruitSource, hopefully, if I log back in as C researcher, so this candidate has now granted consent. So this is the consent was requested, it was submitted, and now granted. And now just by clicking on this link, I'm able to see and receive the name of the person who I want to make contact with, which is the Chris Briggs. I have his email address, I have his location, and I have his phone number to contact him. I can download that to the address book, or I can just leave it here and use this as my address book, and from here I'm able to see any information about this candidate, to see the details of who they are and the information that's in their medical history. And so I'm now able to close that gap and make direct contact with them. So I'm sorry for the breakdowns. It looks like the system just logged me out. I thought I had 5 minutes to log out. It looked like I had like 1 minute of inactivity to log out. And Greg, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Great. Thank you for that demonstration, Robert. Okay, so we have a few questions stacking up, and I encourage any of you all on the phone who have additional questions, just go ahead and type them into your GoToMeeting panel. So let's see. First question is about how researchers sign up. How does a researcher who might want to use the system express their interest and potentially receive an account?
All they need to do is call Genetic Alliance and speak. Is it Mary that they would speak with, Greg?
Yes, I think that's right.
So they would call Genetic Alliance and speak with Mary, who's the office manager, and Mary would arrange for would ask them a convenient time for about a 15-minute conversation and a callback number and an email address, and we would get back in touch with them, confirm the appointment, and go through the 15-minute interview to set up their accounts, get them with temporary login credentials, and if they wanted to have a demonstration of how it should work and a brief 10-minute training session, we would do that at that time or at a later time. So it's very simple.
Yeah, great. Okay. And related question, two kind of additional questions along that same theme. What kind of researchers are we open to including at this stage in the development of the system? and what kinds of questions will we be asking potential researchers during this phone interview?
So the question, let's start with the second question. The questions we'll be asking the researcher is their name, their institution they're associated with, the types of studies that they wish to recruit for, or the platforms that they wish to solicit information from individuals to be included in, and all of that goes into that pick list. If you recall, where cancer researcher in the demo had a list that was a radio dial list that they selected specific projects to disclose to the prospective candidate. All we would be doing is getting that list from them and getting the links to those studies, so that when the individual is contacted, we're able to get that information. If there were any problems, for instance, if a study was not IRB approved or did not fall within the ethics committee approval by the Genetic Alliance BioTrust Ethics Committee, then we would highlight that and talk to them about what they would need to do to get that kind of a project approved. And we would talk about any other non-profit organizations that might list this researcher as part of their board of directors or affiliations, so that there's various ways that they could gain access to individuals, even though those individuals did not know the identity of the specific researcher, but rather they fell within a larger group. So it's that kind of information.
Yeah, thanks for that answer.
And then the second question, or actually the first question, was what types of questions are we anticipating the researchers would be asking? And you might be able to better answer this from the other side of the Reg4ALL and where it's going, but I guess I would say at this point, I think any questions are on the table because of the expanse of what Reg4ALL is connected to in terms of disease info search. And the fact that we can set up these research alerts. So one of the other things we would discuss with them is what kinds of alerts are they looking for, because once we get the alerts set up for the researcher, then the system 24/7 can do the work for them, and it might be several months until someone even meets their criteria, but they wouldn't have to be logging in every day to find out. They would get that information pushed.
Right, yes, right. And actually that's a great point for our researcher audience today, which is we're open to welcoming researchers in who might be at the stage where they're just looking to see what kind of cohorts might be available, and they don't necessarily have their specific study protocol yet. So if you're in that group, it's still an appropriate time to have a conversation with us about whether Reg4ALL and the RecruitSource option might help you. An additional point on the topic of what kind of researchers we will include or allow to interact with the system at this stage in its development. Sharon Cherry, the CEO of Genetic Alliance, is fond of saying that she's excited about what will happen when smart Girl Scouts get their hands on this system and start finding interesting things in the data. And so that gives you all an idea of how broad our vision is for the usefulness of this system. At this stage in its development, we're proceeding cautiously with the first researcher access, and so we'll be relying more on kind of the traditional standards for vetting credible researchers. But our vision does not stop there, and we hope to quickly include things like Smart Girl Scouts and the citizen science movement and others as we go forward and kind of prove that this governance model works.
Well, and Greg, to that point, if you don't mind my just adding, the permissions that are in the basic guide recommendations by the individuals in Reg4ALL include categories like a disease, like sponsored by or approved by a disease info search related organization. So the reason I mentioned earlier researchers would be asked what kind of organizations are they affiliated with, or have they worked with, do they work with, is because that's where the Smart Girl Scouts, in effect, could come in, is if that Smart Girl Scout is associated with an organization that the individual finds it has credibility, then that's how the individual would gain their in effect, credentials, is through the organizations they were affiliated with. Other types of approvals are an IRB-approved research project that's listed on clinicaltrials.gov. So if the researcher was associated with that kind of a study, then they would have the ability just through that general permission to gain access, et cetera.
Right. Yes. Good. Good. Right. And that's also Mr. A helpful point about the disease advocacy and support organizations that we looked very quickly at that screen where an individual sets their privacy and sharing settings. But for people who are entering the system through a relationship with a disease advocacy organization or through the support and advocacy search engine called Disease Info Search, which Genetic Alliance also runs, most of them are checking allow for that organization, that support or advocacy organization, to discover them or discover their data. And so for researchers who want to get a leg up, one way to do that is to go and proactively seek support from, participation support from an advocacy organization, which kind of eases the conversation about sharing and discoverability if you already have their kind of blessing or support.
Well,
okay.
Greg, excuse me, but just let me add one point on that note. In an earlier pilot of this platform, we ran this with a disease advocacy organization that actually set up a list of about 8 researchers that they thought did good work in their condition, and then that advocacy organization sent out about 1,000 invitations to members of the organization asking that they consider getting involved in research and logging in and setting their privacy settings. And roughly 50%, half of those parties who were contacted by the research organization went in, set privacy preferences that made it possible for them to be discovered, and those 8 researchers benefited by that by virtue of having access to individuals that they would otherwise not ever gain access to, because it came through the disease organization in a much more efficient manner for the researchers and for the disease organization.
Right, right. So even though Reg4ALL is an intensely individual controlled interaction, it's still very helpful to be friends with the advocacy organizations. Okay, some additional questions. Is there a limit to how much interaction a researcher can have via the recruiting interface?
Yes, it's really limited by the pick list, because that's what the individual is being pushed. We talked about having, and certainly it's possible, having a open discussion channel be set up that's just effectively a chat between the researcher and an anonymous subject. And at this point in time, we've elected not to do that. It's something that we're assessing as to whether it's a feature we should be adding, but currently it's limited to the disclosure of who is the person, who is the researcher, what's their identity, what kind of research have they done in the past, which is a link to something like their page that describes their credentials and their prior studies, and a link to the specific purpose of their wishing to make contact, and it's coming off of that pick list.
Right. Okay. And so, and I suspect that the gist of this question was not quite so much about the constraints on access just based on how many people are in the system that meet my criteria when I'm searching, but if, for example, I was searching for a particular health condition, and there were 3,000 participants who met my criteria, who had all selected they're open to contact. Is there anything that limits my ability to contact them? Are there limits that I can only do 100 at a time, or I can only get up to 1,000 without becoming a special member, anything like that?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
No, there's no limits on that, and to the extent that that starts to happen, then we're all happy, and we're going to be figuring out how we can have a joint celebration.
Yes, exactly. Fueling participation in research. Robert, what can we say, or what do we know at this point about the cost associated with a researcher registering with RecruitSource and using it?
Well, we're reassessing cost every 3 months. At this point in time, this is really a pilot stage project with Genetic Alliance, and so there is no cost for researchers. 3 months from now, there may be a subscription fee that we would start having, but in terms of establishing the subscription fee, we really want to base that on feedback we're receiving as to how valuable is the system to the researchers that are using it, and what kind of cost are they avoiding by virtue of this, because from Genetic Alliance's perspective, the objective here is to reduce cost and reduce time and to speed the whole process of making contact. So the idea is to reduce the number of barriers to research, not to add to them. And the only way we're going to determine what kind of costs are being avoided and what kind of value is there is to get researchers across multiple conditions that have established alerts, and then to talk to them. And so every 3 months we'll be making an assessment, but the long-term plan is to keep this where it's a fraction, and I mean like 1/10 or lower than what the cost is today of making the same kind of contact.
Okay. And as we're considering the kinds of costs and pricing for this, are there any costs specifically associated with using someone's data?
We have no for anyone, for the people on this call. I think the answer is no. We do have some projects we're working on where it's a project-specific initiative where we're actually focusing on an outreach effort, looking at specific conditions to try to encourage people with those conditions to get in the database, and so that becomes more of a program initiative where there are direct programmatic costs incurred by both Genetic Alliance and private access, and for that we'd have to have a discussion of what kind of cost are we incurring and therefore establish some sort of pricing, but it's more based upon the extra work that we're going in to do that's not just the basic platform. As relates to just use of the basic platform, that stands by my earlier statement.
Right. Okay. So regarding costs and pricing and fees, in general, the ethos at Genetic Alliance is we tend away from kind of that bounty model of kind of selling people. We don't like how that feels, and so we're, along with Robert, we're looking at subscription-oriented kinds of ways to price this service. And as Robert said, during this early phase where we have just released this into the world, it's more important for us to interact with researchers and help them see value in the system than it is to publish a price sheet. So again, if you're interested in using it, give us a call or send us an email, and then we can start the conversation about that. Okay.
Greg, I was just going to amplify on something you said, which was the problem with the bounty model from our perspective is that from a patient perspective, where the patient is not interested in maximizing profit of an intermediary, what they're interested in doing is getting connected to the best research opportunity. And so the objective is to establish long-term a pricing model where the best researcher may be the person that's paying the lowest price, not the highest. And so the subscription model seems to work better, and it becomes more of how many parties that meet your criteria are we making accessible. And as I said, the objective is to find what is the cost of finding those people and then make this a fraction of that cost as a long-term subscription.
Right. Okay, great. So someone asked, in terms of Trial Finder and Reg4ALL, and I think you showed an example of another skin for the Free the Data campaign about the BRCA gene data. What outreach is being done to encourage individuals to register and become part of this community?
So do you want to answer that yourself, or you want me to deal with that one?
Yeah, why don't you mention the parts that you're involved in, and I'll fill out the rest.
So at this point, we are doing 2 or 3 different types of I'll say, pilot efforts. One is focused on liver disease and liver cancer, where we are actually sending out brochures on Trials Finder, is the facing technology for that, to liver cancer clinics, and asking them to post that in their waiting rooms for patients that are coming through the clinics. We're contacting various institutions and asking them to send letters that have been pre-approved by the ethics committee for that contact, and we are looking through various prescription providers to patients that are taking types of drugs that might be related to those conditions, and either sending them an email or a letter. In addition, we are advertising through public service announcements in selected market areas, and contacting using Google AdWords and Facebook ads that are focused on various keywords associated with that condition. On the Free the Data campaign, which is focused on the BRCA1, BRCA2 gene, we're doing some similar activities, and then on the Reg4ALL generally, that's, Greg, you want to just go into that one, since that's a broader thing with disease info search?
Yes, right. Right, yes. And so I was going to list off a bunch of things, including disease info search, and I'll do that one last. So we're doing a bunch of experiments using low-cost Google AdWords to help people find the service and register. We've also engaged some experts in search engine optimization to make sure that Google and Bing and Yahoo and those guys find us and surface us when people are searching for various things. We've also begun some outreach with many of the disease advocacy organizations to which we are connected. As many of you know, Genetic Alliance is really a network of over 10,000 organizations, over 1,000 of which are disease advocacy organizations, and so many of them are beginning to activate their membership to join. We're also doing a fairly broad PR campaign, and you may have seen some of our great coverage in places like Forbes and Technology Review and various blogs and websites. And then we're also doing ongoing additional outreach and evangelism through public speaking and things like that. And then the final element that we think is going to be very powerful is a very tight relationship with disease info search, which is the search engine and source database for a very comprehensive set of information about how someone can find information about a condition that affects them, disease advocacy organizations, other kinds of support, research that's going on. And so on every condition page in Disease Info Search, which is just at diseaseinfosearch.org, all one word, there's also the opportunity to begin to interact with the Reg4ALL system via that kind of gamified survey experience. And we're also engaging people that way, where they might be just casually browsing for information or support about a condition, and then they see this opportunity to actually kind of raise their hand and say, yes, I'm interested in participating in research to some degree. Okay, let's plow through a few more questions. We're nearing the end of our hour. Will you be checking that the researcher is in fact associated with the institution, the research institution they claim to be? And the answer is yes. That will be part of our vetting process, especially in these early days where it's not quite automated. We will be doing lots of checking and vetting to make sure people are who they say they are, and that the project they say they're doing actually has been approved by the IRB and that kind of thing. Can people who are getting requests to connect from researchers turn off these notifications via email, these email notifications? Okay.
Yes, at any time.
Great. Great. If a participant chooses to decline any of the options on their sharing and privacy settings, does the system provide any option for the participant to later change their mind and say, yes, they consent or they allow it?
Yes, that also is able to be done from the privacy dashboard. So it shows them what their selections are for those individual researchers, and they can come back and change it to either go back to ask me again or to go straight to permit. And if
right, and in fact,
as soon as they change, the alert would come back up for that researcher.
Great, right. In fact, I've actually done that in my personal account in Reg4ALL. After I found out a little bit more information about an organization, I changed my setting to allow, and that was very easy to do. Okay, is there any specific format that needs to be followed in creating the notification alerts or delimiters for researchers? Does that question make sense for you, Robert?
Well, I think the answer is it's a templated format that's being driven by the system. That's why it's done through the pick list. So it's going to be the name of the study and then the URLs for those studies or purposes of use. But it's all formatted automatically by the system once it's entered into the system. So this would be in the introductory email message where we're saying to the researcher, here's the information you should have gathered by the time we speak.
Okay. All right. And then final question. This one's a moderately long one. You said that you hope to launch a system whereby individuals can request that outside databases where they have medical data stored, such as electronic medical records, can submit it directly into Reg4ALL. And the question is, do you hope to make this automated? For example, will there only be certain formats that can be submitted that will feed directly into the database?
I'm sorry, give me once again, for example.
Will there be only certain formats that will be allowed to be submitted into the database? If we automate it, will it only work for people who are in a system maybe that's governed by EPIC but not by Cerner, or how's that going to work, do you think?
Well, the reason we're optimistic that this fall we'll be able to do this is because there are various standards that are being adopted as part of the high-tech regulations and the meaningful use initiatives. And so the format that's going to become that is a standard for this kind of transmission is CCDA, and that's the standard that we would anticipate the information coming across as in an interoperable form. But as the upload of the data for the BRCA reports that we have and free the data shows, we're really able to accept any sort of information in terms of a JPEG file or anything that wishes to be uploaded. And so we're going to be moving in the direction of standards because the society is, but initially will probably be more broad than the standards even permit.
Great. Yeah, terrific. And Tanya, if you could put the control back to my screen, and I will wrap up here. Thank you all again for attending today. Thank you for the great questions. And I just want to call your attention to the webinars coming up. So if you go to the geneticalliance.org website and click on events, and then click on this here, learn more and register about the webinar series Registry for All. And you can see here on this page we have recordings of previous webinars. And then if you continue to scroll down, this is the one we're on today, Reg4ALL and Researchers. And I just want to call your attention to the fact that there are more webinars coming up. So if you don't yet know all about the participant side of Reg4ALL, this one, Reg4ALL and an individual on July 10 is great. And then on July 24th, we have one specific to companies. How will the commercial world interact with the Reg4ALL community? And then we have webinars scheduled out through August that I invite you all to sign up for and participate in. And with that, I will bid you all a good day, and thank you again for your interaction. And one more time, if you would like to express your interest in using the researcher interface for Reg4ALL, you can call the Genetic Alliance office, or you can just email me, and my email address, which has been on the slides, is gbiggers@geneticalliance.org.